Ever since Christopher Nolan announced the Odyssey, I've seen one claim repeated over and over again, that it's based on Emily Wilson's translation, the one and only translation, at least in my opinion. For those of you who don't know, Emily Read This is a YouTube channel where I love to compare books to their on-screen adaptations. Emily Wilson is a classics professor at the University of Pennsylvania and the first woman to publish an English translation of the Odyssey. Naturally, I was excited when everyone started saying Christopher Nolan was adapting her version. But after watching the movie, I'm not actually so sure that's true. I did a little digging, and while Nolan has referenced Emily Wilson before, specifically her famous opening line, "Tell me about a complicated man," I've never found him saying the film is based on her translation. In interviews, Wilson not only said she's never been consulted, the two of them have actually never even spoken. The movie also makes several choices that Emily Wilson herself would probably disagree with. So, let's talk about it. The biggest giveaway that Nolan didn't adapt Wilson comes from one word. Throughout the movie, the people working in Odysseus' palace are called servants. Emily Wilson famously refuses to use that word. She deliberately translates the Greek as slave, arguing that words like servant and maid sanitize the realities of ancient Greece, where slavery was simply a fact. It's one of the defining choices of her translation, so it's immediately noticeable when the movie abandons it. But it isn't just Emily Wilson's interpretations that are missing. Many of the moments that have defined the Odyssey for nearly 3,000 years have been rewritten or left out completely. The omission that surprised me the most was the famous nobody scene with the Cyclops. It's probably the defining example of Odysseus' intelligence and cunning, where he defeats Polyphemus not through strength, but through language. It's also one of the most famous moments in Western literature in general, and it's just gone. And while we're here, why weren't the men tied under the sheep? Are you telling me that they actually snuck by with hay sticking out their backs? Ugh. The olive tree bed is also missing. Odysseus built his and Penelope's bedroom around a living olive tree, carving the trunk into one of the bedposts. It's the ultimate symbol of their immovable bond, and without it, I found their reunion surprisingly lackluster. Athena's role, too, is dramatically reduced. In the poem, she's basically the puppet master, manipulating events, constantly in disguise or disguising people, steering Odysseus towards his ultimate revenge. In the film, she's mostly an apparition who sometimes gives advice. The bag of winds is skipped, and the Phaeacians, whose hospitality provides the entire framing device for Odysseus telling his adventures, are largely taken on by Calypso. And there also just wasn't enough crying. Seriously, Odysseus spends so much of the poem openly grieving his men and longing for home. The rest of the cast is constantly sobbing too. Ancient heroes are surprisingly emotional, and I really like that about them. The film feels so much more restrained in comparison. Individually, none of these omissions bothered me very much, but taken all together, they started to make me feel like a movie called The Odyssey wasn't really adapting the Odyssey, at least as I knew it. According to Esquire, Nolan incorporated material from the Aeneid and Aeschylus's Agamemnon. We saw that with the character of Sinon, for example, who doesn't even appear in Homer. He actually comes from Virgil. All this cements for me that Nolan wasn't trying to faithfully adapt Emily Wilson, or even necessarily preserve the structure and emphasis of Homer's original poem. He's creating his own version of the myth by weaving together multiple ancient sources. And that's completely fine. I just wish the internet would stop calling it Emily Wilson's Odyssey. Her translation is so distinctive because of the choices she makes, and many of those choices simply aren't reflected in the film. Maybe we can blame AI summaries for propagating the association. So, if this isn't Emily Wilson's Odyssey, what is it? Christopher Nolan's version is interested in trauma, in guilt, and in the psychological consequences of war. These are very Christopher Nolan themes. If you've seen Memento, Interstellar, Inception, or Oppenheimer, it makes sense that he'd gravitate towards memory and regret. It's a story of yet another man desperately trying to get back to the woman he loves. One change that I thought was striking was how explicitly the movie connects Odysseus' suffering to Zeus's law of hospitality, what the Greeks call xenia. Hospitality is already one of the central ideas running through Homer's poem, with every island becoming a test of how hosts and guests treat one another. Nolan turns that recurring theme into the emotional source of Odysseus' guilt after Troy. It's not Homer's version, but I thought it was an interesting reinterpretation. More generally, I thought the movie was at its strongest whenever Nolan trusted visual storytelling instead of dialogue. The Trojan horse sequence was awesome. It immediately reminded me of Dunkirk. Watching the horse being dragged into Troy was incredibly exhausting. I loved how claustrophobic and disgusting it felt inside, and the moment the soldiers quietly emerge is fantastic. Cersei molding the crew into pigs also looked incredible. Agamemnon was great. He had this terrifying, commanding presence every time he appeared on screen. And I was a sucker for the scene where the cowherd drops weapons down to the suitors during the final massacre. Nolan knows how to stage action. I'll absolutely give him that. I thought the movie was the weakest whenever it stopped to explain itself. The dialogue sounded caught between modern English and elevated classical language, and therefore it never felt natural, and so much of it existed purely to deliver exposition. I hate that. The character work also felt flatter to me in the movie. While I liked Tom Holland's performance, Telemachus starts the movie much more confident than I imagined him. In the poem, he has one of the clearest character arcs, gradually growing into an adult, a man, and I really missed that. Penelope also didn't quite work for me. She gets this overtly modern feminist speech about how long she's been holding everything together, and ironically, I think it makes her less interesting. Athena, as I mentioned earlier, loses almost everything that makes her fascinating. In Homer, she's constantly pulling strings behind the scenes. In the movie, she feels very passive. I don't even know why she's included, honestly. A few other things pulled me out of the movie. I thought Matt Damon looked a little older than I imagined Odysseus. Emily Wilson hilariously has said her dream casting would be Samuel L. Jackson, which sounded completely absurd when I first heard it, but you know what? I'm kind of into it. I also noticed several continuity and editing choices that pulled me out of the movie too. And maybe my biggest surprise was how dark the entire film looked. When I read the Odyssey, I picture white. White marble, white sails, bright Mediterranean sunlight reflecting off the sea. Emily Wilson's translation feels surprisingly bright despite everything that happens. Nolan imagines mud, smoke, firelight, underground halls. The Ithaca Palace feels more like a dungeon than a home. Neither interpretation is wrong, but for me, something magical got lost in the movie. As for the ending, I was surprised we never saw Melantho's punishment, which is one of the most disturbing moments in the poem. It's where all the unfaithful slaves get, strung up by their necks. I love Robert Pattinson, but Antinous was almost cartoonishly evil, and, I thought the ending worked reasonably well until I realized that Odysseus and Penelope are literally sailing off into the sunset. So is Christopher Nolan's Odyssey an adaptation of Emily Wilson's translation? No, I really don't think so. Rather than faithfully adapting one version of the poem, Nolan is creating his own interpretation through the lens of the kind of stories he's always been interested in telling. Stories about memory, trauma, guilt, and impossible journeys home. Whether people like that version is a separate question. Personally, I still prefer Emily Wilson's, not because I think it's the correct one, but because I think it captures what I love most about the Odyssey: its wit, its humanity, and its emotional openness. One of Emily Wilson's 20 rules of translation reads, "If nobody objects to any choice you make, your choices are too timid." And people were definitely objecting to Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, at least to the trailer, which has become the second most downvoted one in all of YouTube history. But after its release, the movie has been getting 10 out of 10 reviews from critic after critic. Whether it's truly a great adaptation or a disappointing one probably depends on who you ask. But I do think it proves one thing: Nolan was not trying to make a safe or familiar version of this story. He was trying to make his own Odyssey. Let's just not confuse his with Emily's. Emily Wilson or Emily Read This. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Penelope, are you ready to do a video about the Odyssey? Okay, let's do it!